Because the reality that you and I live in at the moment is very much one of a storm. Whether it's culturally or nationally or politically, the last few years have been pretty buffeting. You might feel as though you are living in a storm individually. The church, certainly in the UK and in the West, has been living in a storm with all sorts of leadership crises and resignations and scandals, sadly. But also, perhaps socially and culturally, we've been living through a storm. Over the last few years, a new term has been coined in trying to explain the cultural turmoil that we are living through. Because if you add them all up, there are quite a few. Climate change, a once-in-a-100-year global pandemic, war in Ukraine and Russia, increased tension in the Middle East, conflicts in Israel and Palestine, the rise of nationalism and populism, cost of living crisis and energy crisis, societies increasingly divided and polarized. You feeling happy and comfortable? You smiling? Well, a few years ago, I think it was a writer on the Financial Times coined this phrase, a polycrisis. This isn't about parrots, but a polycrisis is when you have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different crises that emerge and merge together to produce a complex situation where multiple interconnected crises converge and amplify each other, resulting in a predicament that is difficult to manage or resolve. Now, for many people in what we call the global south, they've been living in this sort of situation for decades. But it's really over the last 10 years that those of us in the West have now begun to experience the same, a polycrisis. We are living in a storm. There's a think tank called More in Common that now works globally, and in July they published a survey where they'd asked 20,000 people in Britain how Britain felt. 6 prime ministers in 9 years. 87% of Britons across all political parties having either not very much trust in politicians or none at all. And this distrust extending beyond healthy skepticism to deep-seated contempt for what is seen often as a political class seen as self-serving and out of touch. And the first thing that people identified was that there is a crisis of trust. Secondly, Britons feel worn down by both political chaos and personal financial pressures. Despite being told since the 2008 financial crash that getting Britain back on track will require tough choices, many of us 8-9 years later still feel battered and bruised financially. And lots of the people in Britain feel exhausted and are struggling. Thirdly, there is this rising threat perception. 8 out of 10 Britons apparently believe that the world is becoming more dangerous, and most do not believe the government is able to keep the country safe or get the country a good deal on the world stage. Britain's concerns span escalating international conflicts, energy security, the Trump presidency and its unpredictability, failure to control immigration, perceptions of rising crime, lack of progress in tackling climate change. Are you still feeling happy? Are you still smiling? Are you still thinking, gosh, I'm really pleased I came to church for this uplifting message this morning? Because fourthly and finally, there's a perceived loss of agency. What does that mean? Amongst many Britons, there is a feeling that they do not have control over their own lives and that they could be thrown off course by the next energy bill rise or interest rate hike. Whatever we may have thought about the 150,000 people who marched through London last week, whatever we may think about them, whatever motives we may attribute to why they were there, the reality is that many people in the UK feel forgotten, they feel ignored, and they feel left behind. And at the same time, many people are aware of a shift in some people's thinkings and attitudes. One writer, James Marriott, observed this: the traditional consolations, he said, of a well-lived secular life are weakening. Romance, friendships, family, and materialism figure less prominently as sources of meaning in the lives of a generation that is poorer, lonelier, less sexually active, less sociable, and less likely to start a family. All that might explain something of the phenomenon that's been observed over the last 12 months or so, that one person observed. It's been called a quiet revival, but it might be better described as a quiet revival of curiosity, where people under the age of 30, with no previous experience of church or Christianity, have done their research on the internet. They've Googled spirituality and they've compared different religions and different faiths, and they've gone online and they've watched different religions and different services from different churches, and they then turn up at a church like this, and Pentecostal churches on one extreme, and cathedrals and Roman Catholic churches on the other extreme, and churches like ours are seeing this, where week by week by week by week, people under the age of 30 come forward for prayer at the end and say, I want to know God, can you help me? And you may well be one of those people who fall into that category. You're under 30. This is the first time that you have ever been in a church building. You're looking at the front thinking, why is that guy at the front wearing that funny thing? You've never been in a church like this. The songs are new to you. A baptism is new to you. Well, let me reassure you, you're not alone, because you're part of a phenomenon that is being seen where people under 30 are now asking deeper questions about life, about faith, and ultimately about God. And as we've talked to people over the last 9-10 months or so, they will quite often say, I want to know God, I've done my research, I've compared different religions, I've looked at different churches, and this is why I'm here. So something has shifted in the cultural zeitgeist, if you like, of how young people in particular are thinking about faith, because secularism and the world around us has become an increasingly dangerous place. It even led to the Newsagent's podcast going to the Wildfires Festival and Emily Maitlis asking Pete Greig and 4 young adults what they thought was going on. And each of those 4 young adults had become a Christian in the last 12 months, and they spoke very honestly and very authentically. You can go and listen to it online, the Newsagent's podcast with Emily Maitlis going to a Christian festival. Why are younger people asking these questions? They're asking these questions because culturally, socially, economically, we are living in the middle of a storm. We're living in a storm politically and spiritually. The church is not immune to this. We as a church have sought, therefore, to discern, though, what God is saying to us in the middle of this storm about what he wants us to do and be over the next 5 years. Now, if you've ever been in a storm, you will know how disorienting and confusing and frightening it can be. Ask anybody who's been caught in a storm while attempting to bag a Monroe. Up seems down. Remember the worst storm that I have ever been in when I did a cross-channel ferry crossing when I was working for Eurocamp before I went to university. And it was a force 9 gale. And we headed out of the harbour at Plymouth. And I remember sitting in the cafe and the front of the boat went up. And then the front of the boat went down. And I remember turning to the guy, he was a lorry driver with me. I was his sort of lorry driver's mate for the week. And I just said, I'm going to have to lie down. And for the next 9 hours, we went up and we went down. We went to the side and we went to the other side. I saw things that I should never have seen. And I saw bits of me that I didn't know were there. And it was horrendous. And I've never felt, I literally thought I was going to die for about 6 hours. And it was absolutely horrendous because being in a storm is frightening, it's confusing, and it's disorientating. But there is good news. Storms are not new to Jesus. Storms are not new to Jesus. In that passage that Katrina read for us, we see Jesus coming to his followers, his disciples, in the middle of a storm. This biography of Jesus, the Gospel of John, sits alongside the other three by Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and it's a gospel that contains 7 signs, events that point beyond themselves to reveal who Jesus really is. And we've looked at several of them already in this series, and today we're on number 5, where Jesus walks on water. The context is this, as we looked at last week. Jesus had spent the day teaching and healing people. There were crowds of thousands of people, including 5,000 men, but many, many more women and children. They were hungry. Jesus had fed them miraculously using a small boy's picnic of 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Even more miraculously, there were 12 baskets of leftovers left over. As a result, the crowd want to acclaim Jesus. They've been waiting for hundreds of years for the Messiah, God's person who would come and reveal the kingdom of God to them, a messenger. And one of the signs that they expected was a repeat of the miraculous provision of bread. Just like God had provided the manna for the people of Israel when they'd been in the Exodus out of Egypt, the prophet, the Messiah, would provide bread. And now we're in this situation where Jesus is providing bread, and suddenly they think, this is the guy, this is the one, this is the prophet with a capital P, this is the person that we have been waiting for hundreds of years. And they try to make Jesus king by force. Still tempting for some people today, particularly in the West, for people to want to confuse nationalism with Christianity, and they want to make Jesus king by force. Jesus is very clear that his kingdom is different. His kingdom operates differently. It's with a different set of criteria and different values to the kingdoms of this world. Jesus withdraws. He leaves the crowd and goes up on a mountainside to pray by himself. And that's where we pick up the story. The disciples decide to row across the Sea of Galilee back home to Capernaum. It's about 12 miles across the Sea of Galilee. We're not talking the Firth of Forth. This is much bigger. And we're told significantly that it's evening and it's dark and Jesus is not with them. It's evening and it's dark and Jesus is absent. Now, light and darkness recur throughout the Gospel of John. It's there in the first chapter that we looked at a few weeks ago, as John tells us that Jesus is the light of all mankind, how John the Baptist was a witness to the light, then how the light shines in the darkness, and how the darkness has never overcome it. Nicodemus, in John chapter 3, comes under the cover of darkness to talk to Jesus. Jesus talked to the woman at the well in John 4 at midday, in the glare of the midday sun. Jesus himself in John chapter 8 proclaims that he is the light of the world. So light and darkness play quite an important role in the Gospel of John. And here is this night in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, where it is dark and Jesus is absent. And to make matters worse, a storm begins to brew. Apparently it's very common on the Sea of Galilee because of its geography. The disciples, we're told, have rowed 3 or 4 miles, and then it starts to get choppy. The wind starts to get up, and then it starts to get really rough, and then they see something that they are not expecting to see. They see Jesus walking on the water towards them. And note, then, and only then, John tells us, they were frightened. They weren't frightened in the storm. They become scared when they see Jesus walking on the water towards them. That's when John tells us they're terrified. Jesus' response is to say to them, well, in the Greek, ego eimi, literally, it's me, or I am. Jesus is deliberately using that phrase because in John's gospel, as well as 7 signs, there are these 7 I ams, not including this one, where Jesus makes these statements: I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the gate for the sheep, etc., etc. You can see them on the screen. It's a deliberate repetition of the phrase that God himself uses to Moses when Moses says, when he's being sent to Egypt to Pharaoh, and he says, well, who shall I say send me? Is sending me. And God says, I am is sending you. I am sending you. I am who I will be. I am. It's the great revelation, proclamation, if you like, of who God is. Now, in the Bible, in the Old Testament in particular, the sea is often associated with chaos, disorder, and even evil. But you see what is happening here? Jesus is walking on top of the water. Now, that's not something that is easy to do. Maybe you've tried it. Maybe you've tried it in a swimming pool. Maybe if you have a bath tonight, as we all celebrate Europe's victory in the Ryder Cup later on, and you're tempted to have a bath in celebration, just try and get your foot and just put it on the water and think, what would it be like for this water to take my weight? It's not going to happen. All that's probably going to happen if you try and stand on the water is you're going to slip and fall over, you're going to cry out, and someone in the house is going to have to come and rescue you. And it's not going to be pretty. And yet, Jesus walks on the water. The people of Israel were led through the water by Moses in that miraculous parting of the Red Sea. Here Jesus comes walking on top of the water. Jesus is over the chaos. Jesus is over the disorder. Jesus is on top of even evil itself. So we may be living in a polycrisis. We may be living in the middle of a storm. And I know, knowing some of your stories at the moment, that some of you are facing a really big storm. One of the things that we've been chatting about as a clergy team over the past few weeks is that as we've talked to people and listened to people, the number of people in P&Gs at the moment who are going through a really hard time. It might be individually, it might be as a couple, it might be as a family, it might be to do with a health diagnosis, it might be because of a financial situation, it might be because of a relational breakdown. But you're either in the middle of a storm or you know a storm is brewing. And again, the reality is that we're living in a storm personally, culturally, socially, economically, and financially. And it might well be for you this morning that appears to be very dark. And Jesus may not appear to be with you. You've known him really close in the past, but the things that are happening in your life just now, things that are happening in the lives of people that you know, things that are going on relationally, as well as culturally and socially and financially, politically, etc., means that you're finding it increasingly difficult to discern the presence of Jesus with you. Now, in Matthew and Mark's account of this incident, Jesus does calm the storm. But it's quite striking to me that in John's account, he doesn't mention the storm being calmed. The disciples get Jesus in the boat. It's a lovely phrase, John says, and the disciples were willing to have him in the boat. And that's sort of Hebrew understatement for they sort of grab him and go, you're with us. And if we're with you, everything will be all right. And then they row, and well, they don't row. Immediately, it appears miraculously, they're on the other side of the lake. But Jesus appears to them in the middle of the storm, and he does not calm the storm in John's account. And maybe one of the things that you need to hear this morning is that Jesus is with you in the middle of the storm. He might be difficult to see. His presence might be difficult to discern. But he is with you. And if you can't discern his presence, he's coming to you. He might not calm the storm. The storm might not go away. But he might want you to know him in the middle of the storm. Some of the most profound experiences, as I've talked to people in over 40 years of being a Christian, is when people have been going through real pain and real suffering, and they've known the presence of God in a way that they often say afterwards, I would never have got to have experienced God in that way if I hadn't gone through what I went through. Not that God causes what happened, not that they would wish what happened on anybody else, but their story is, I'm able to look back and know that God was with me through that time in an unusually close way. Because it strikes me that again and again, Jesus reveals his presence in the middle of the storm. And that's what we sense, if you like, God is saying to us as a church just now. That in the middle of all the storms that are brewing around us, individually, corporately, and spiritually, Jesus is simply saying, it's me, look to me, follow me, even in the dark of the storm. The process that we've been through over the last 9 months is we've prayed together, discerned together, talked together. We've had surveys and questionnaires and congregational evenings. We've thought about it over the summer, and hopefully we're going to see a video which updates all of us with where we've landed and we'll be heading over the next 4 or 5 years. Apparently Jesus said, where 2 or 3 shackets are, there I will be. And it took me a long time as well to get up on that drone and to fly it over the church. So hopefully you've seen, as you're probably sitting on it now, but this postcard with the Multiply logo on the front. And that has a QR code, and that will take you to more of the sort of stuff behind what is behind the top lines of this strategy. These, what we're calling them 8 pillars, if you like. And there's different ways in which we can be involved in that. But we're going to be thinking more about discipleship. We're going to be thinking about how we become whole life disciples of Christ more. We're looking to increase the engagement between different generations in the church, improving the pastoral care that we offer. And then the biggie, really, that will hit most of us, the impact, is this thing of becoming a multi-site church. And what we're looking at the moment and have been looking for are locations maybe in the west of the city and in the south of the city where we could start to plant congregations. Not new churches, they'll remain part of P's and G's, but we're going to plant new congregations. Because we believe that God is calling us to do that. There are gaps in the diocese, the Episcopal Diocese of Edinburgh, where there aren't Episcopal churches, that it would make sense for us to plant congregations into those 2 areas. That will release space here. All the church growth experts tell us that you can stay at the level that we are now for about 12 to 18 months, where you're 80-85% full. And the received wisdom over the last 40 or 50 years is you can do this for about 12 to 18 months. But if you don't do something, add another service, plant another congregation, or plant a church, people will get frustrated because when they come in through those doors, there's nowhere for them to sit. And frankly, I would be amazed if people lasted 12 months. But if for 12 months you're coming in and there's nowhere for you to sit, plus also you're thinking about our children's work, which is at maximum capacity. All the children's groups at the moment, we can't find other rooms to put them in. We're thinking of sort of stacking them on top of each other. And that would be easier in terms of capacity, but it wouldn't be a great experience for them. So we need to do something to release capacity here. And then social transformation, thinking about sustainability and increasing that welcome culture. And then, we made that video a few weeks ago and we said we're going to talk to the 12 o'clock congregation and we're going to talk to the 7 o'clock congregation. The 7 o'clock congregation is already growing. So this term, for the last few weeks, the congregation has been over 250 at 7 o'clock week by week. So that's growing by itself. At 12 o'clock, we need to have a chat with them and say, well, how do we grow this as we go forward? So it's going to be demanding, and that's why we need everyone to play their part, to do these three things: to pray, to serve, and to give. But please, please, please don't forget the why. Andy mentioned it in the video. The why of why we feel God is calling us to do this is the 95%. It's very easy to sit in a church like P&G's, or Charlotte, or Carrubbers, or City on a Hill, or one of the other churches across the city that is growing, and think that every church in Edinburgh is like this. It's not. The reality is, on any given Sunday, there is only 5% of the city that will be in any church at all. That means there are 95% of the population of Edinburgh who don't know Jesus. And that is why we're called to multiply. Multiply what we think God is doing here, in the middle of the storm. But to pray. It's going to be a week of prayer on the 17th of November and another week of prayer in January. Because as yet we haven't found these locations, and we actually have a sort of sneaking suspicion that we're not going to find them humanly, that it's going to have to be God that opens the door to them and reveals them to us. And maybe one or two relationships and conversations that need to happen. So we're in a storm, but we also are confident that Jesus is with us in that storm and is calling us to follow him. And my challenge for you is, what part are you going to play? Whether it's through prayer, whether it's through service, whether it's for the first time or increasing your financial giving. Our financial giving has risen over £100,000 over the last 2 years, which is just remarkable. And we do want to say thank you. We don't take that for granted, but for this to get off the ground, we're estimating that it's going to take another 100,000 over the next 12 months to enable us to do all that we think God is calling us to do and be. Let's pray together.